Get on your knees and beg me. Fat girl's father sold her to mountain man, but he taught her. Get on your knees and beg me, Theodore Whitmore barked, his voice cracking like the winter whip he carried. Snow hurled across Black Ridge's square, stinging cheeks and turning breath to smoke. In the center of the jeering crowd, Grace Whitmore knelt on the frozen boards, wrists bound with coarse rope, a splintered placard hanging from her neck. Damaged goods, cheap. She was 21, round-cheeked and trembling, her dress ripped where the rope bit through the sleeves. Bruises clouded the pale skin at her throat. She tried to shrink from the stairs, but there was nowhere to go except deeper into the cold. Laughter rose from the saloon porch. A rotten apple struck her shoulder and broke apart, wet and sour. The sheriff watched from the doorway, hat tipped low, as if the law were only a rumor up here in the high country. "Who'll take the fat sow?" Theodore crowed, lifting Grace's chin with the whip handle. "She eats like a mule and works like half a man, $10 to be rid of the shame." A drunk stumbled forward, breath steeped in rye. "5," he slurred. "I'll stable her with my hogs." The crowd roared. Grace swallowed a sob so hard it burned. She had washed his shirts, balanced his ledgers, prayed for a gentler word. Instead, her father brought her here, trussed and trembling, to sell the last soft thing left in his house, his own child. 10, another man called, eyes crawling, "and I'll test what I paid for." Theodore spread his hands, a showman in a snowstorm. "Hear that, gentlemen? A bargain." Grace shut her eyes. The rope rasped with every breath. If she asked mercy from the sheriff, he would shrug. If she asked it from God, would it arrive too late? A hush fell, sudden as a gust dying. The crowd turned. At the far end of the street, a tall man stepped out of the white, leading a dun mare by the reins. He wore a wolf-lined coat, dark with snowmelt, hat brim iced, beard black as burnt pine. His eyes, iron gray, watchful, took one look at the girl on her knees and changed temperature, like steel plunged into flame. He walked forward without raising his voice or his hands. Men shifted off the planks as if pushed by wind. He stopped beside Grace, lifted the placard string with 2 fingers, and cut her bonds with a belt knife so quick the rope scarcely knew it had been dead. "Enough," he said to Theodore, the word low and final. "You don't sell people here." "She's mine to sell," Theodore snapped, whip twitching. "Name your price or move along." The stranger's gaze did not flicker. "Name yours." Coins hit the snow a moment later, more than any drunk had ever carried, more than any father deserved. He slid his coat from his shoulders and settled it over Grace's, the weight of it like a vow. "Stand up," he murmured for her alone. "You're safe." She did not know him. She could hardly breathe, but when he turned and the square parted, Grace rose and followed the only man who had said one true thing all day. The wind screamed across the plains as Ethan Blackthorn led his horse out of Black Ridge, the girl following half a step behind. Snow crunched under her boots, thin fabric clinging to her legs, the coat he'd thrown over her swallowing her whole. The town's laughter still echoed behind them like the last notes of a cruel song. For an hour, neither spoke. Then, when the road bent toward the frozen river, Grace's voice cracked the silence. "Why did you do that?" Ethan did not look back. "Because no one else would?" Grace hugged the coat tighter. "He's my father." Ethan's jaw hardened. "Fathers can be worse than strangers. That one's worse than most." She didn't argue. There were things she had stopped defending long ago. When they reached the small camp he had left at the edge of the timberline, Ethan tied his horse and stirred the dying fire back to life. He handed her a canteen. "Drink. Slow. You've been without food too long." She obeyed, sipping carefully. Her hand shook so badly she spilled half of it into the snow. Ethan crouched beside her, his presence quiet but massive. "Grace Whitmore," she said suddenly, as if reminding herself she still had a name. "Ethan," he answered. "Blackthorn." She glanced up at him, uncertain. "You live up there?" She gestured toward the mountains that loomed black against the white sky. "A cabin. Game's better than people. Easier to read, too." Grace tried to smile, but her lips were cracked. "So, you bought me. Does that mean I work for you now?" Ethan's eyes flicked to hers, gray, sharp, but not unkind. "No one owns you anymore. You can go wherever you please once you're strong enough." That word, free, sat strange and heavy in her chest. Freedom had never been an option before. It was like being told she could fly if she only stretched her arms far enough. She looked down at the calluses on her palms. "And if I have nowhere to go?" Ethan threw another log into the fire. Sparks leapt upward, disappearing into the wind. "Then you stay until you figure it out." He didn't look at her as he spoke, and she could not read whether he was offering pity or mercy. That night, under the lean-to he built from pine boughs, Grace couldn't sleep. The cold pressed through her thin dress despite the heavy coat. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face twisted with disgust, the whip rising again. She bit her lip to keep from crying. Then she heard the sound of boots in snow. Ethan was awake, tending the fire. He had stripped off his gloves, hands raw and scarred. When the wind caught the flames, she saw faint lines across his knuckles, scars old as guilt. "You should rest," he said without turning. "I can't." "Because of him?" Grace hesitated. "Because of everything." Ethan nodded slightly, still facing the fire. "You're not the first person to be broken by people who should have cared for you." His voice was rough, but there was something else under it. Truth, maybe even recognition. Grace pulled the coat tighter around herself. "What about you? Who broke you?" For a moment he didn't move. Then he said quietly, "The mountain keeps its own secrets, Miss Whitmore. Some things are better buried beneath snow." She understood it was not an invitation to ask again, but she also understood pain when she heard it. Morning brought a bitter frost and a pale sun. Ethan handed her a chunk of bread and dried meat. "Eat while you ride. It's another 2 hours to the ridge." "To your cabin?" He nodded once. She climbed awkwardly onto the horse. When she faltered, he steadied her waist with one hand, lifting her effortlessly. The contact burned through her layers of fear. "Thank you," she murmured. Ethan swung up behind her, the leather creaking beneath his weight. "Hold on, it's a steep climb." As they started up the narrow trail, Grace felt the world shift. Town shrinking behind, mountain rising ahead, and somewhere between those two, a fragile thing beginning to stir in her chest. Not love yet, not even hope, but something dangerous enough to hurt if it died. She did not know that Ethan Blackthorn had once sworn never to save anyone again, and he did not yet know that Grace Whitmore's quiet persistence would test every vow he had ever made. By the time they reached the tree line, both carried ghosts the other had yet to see, and both, though they wouldn't admit it, had already started to thaw. The trail wound upward into a world of silence and snow. Pines leaned over the path like dark sentinels, their branches heavy with ice. The horse's hooves crunched through drifts that reached its knees, and the cold air burned with every breath. Grace sat in front of Ethan on the saddle, both hands gripping the pommel, afraid that one slip would send her tumbling into the white abyss below. Behind her, Ethan's steady presence was the only warmth she could feel. His arm brushed her shoulder each time he reached for the reins. "Lean with the horse," he said quietly when they climbed a sharp slope. "Don't fight it." Grace obeyed, her movements awkward but careful. "I've never ridden before." "I figured." She smiled faintly. His tone wasn't mocking. It was simply a fact, spoken with the same calm strength that had carried her away from hell. They rode for nearly an hour without speaking. The higher they climbed, the thicker the fog grew. Grace's hair froze at the ends, strands of gold turned white by frost. Every few minutes, Ethan would ask if she was warm enough. Each time, she would nod, though her teeth chattered so hard it hurt. At one point, she whispered, "Why do you live up here all alone?" Ethan didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "People make too much noise. Up here you can hear yourself think. Sometimes that's the only way to stay sane." Grace looked ahead. "But doesn't it get lonely?" "It's supposed to." The words cut through the cold like a blade. She didn't ask again. By late afternoon, the sky turned the color of bruised metal. Snow began to fall heavier, thick flakes spinning like ash. Ethan's shoulders tensed. "We'll have to stop soon," he said. "Storm's coming faster than I thought." They found shelter beneath an overhang of rock, where the wind broke against the cliff face. Ethan dismounted first, then lifted Grace down as if she weighed nothing. His hands lingered for a moment longer than necessary, warm, steady, grounding. He set to work with practiced precision, gathering kindling, striking flint, feeding a small blaze to life. Soon the fire crackled, its light painting his face in flickers of gold and shadow. Grace huddled close to it, holding her hands over the flames. Her skin stung as it thawed, but the pain was good. It meant she was still alive. Ethan poured her a tin cup of broth from his pack. "Drink this." Grace accepted it, watching the steam curl upward. "You always travel prepared, don't you?" He gave a small shrug. "Up here, being unprepared gets you dead." She studied him from across the fire. The lines on his face were carved deep. Years of solitude, maybe loss. He wasn't an old man, but something in his eyes looked older than the mountains themselves. "You don't talk much," she said softly. "I talk when there's something worth saying." "Then why help me?" Ethan looked into the fire for a long time before replying, "Because I remember what it's like to kneel and have no one pull you back up." Grace's throat tightened. She wanted to ask what he meant, but she saw the warning in his expression, the wall he built around that part of himself, and she respected it. Instead, she said, "Thank you for everything." He met her gaze, and for the first time, something unguarded flickered there. "Don't thank me yet. We still have a long climb ahead." That night, as the storm raged outside their small shelter, Grace lay near the fire wrapped in Ethan's coat. He sat a few feet away, sharpening a hunting knife, the rhythmic scrape of steel against stone steady as a heartbeat. Sleep would not come. The wind howled, carrying echoes that sounded like her father's voice, the crowd's laughter, the crack of the whip. She turned over and whispered, "Ethan?" He looked up. "What is it? Do you ever stop hearing them?" "Hearing who?" "The ones who hurt you." Ethan was silent for a long time. Then he set the knife down and said, "No, but eventually their voices fade. You learn to drown them out with the sound of your own." Grace closed her eyes. "I don't think mine's strong enough yet." "It will be," he said simply. Something about the certainty in his tone made her believe him. By dawn, the storm had passed. The world outside was white and untouched, a new beginning, buried beneath a night of chaos. Ethan packed their gear, doused the fire, and helped Grace onto the horse. They rode again, higher and higher, until the trail leveled into a valley of snow-dusted pines. Smoke curled from a chimney in the distance, a cabin, small but sturdy, built against the ridge. "That's it?" Grace asked. "That's home," Ethan said. When they reached the porch, he swung down and tied the horse. The door creaked as he opened it, revealing a space rough but warm. Shelves lined with jars, a stone hearth, a large bed draped with furs, a table carved by hand. Grace stepped inside slowly, awe mixing with disbelief. "It's beautiful." "It's quiet," he corrected, setting down his pack. She smiled faintly. "That too?" Ethan nodded toward the firewood stacked near the hearth. "I'll get a blaze going. Sit, before you fall over." Grace did as told, sinking into a chair. The warmth of the cabin and the smell of pine sap filled her lungs. For the first time in years, she felt something close to safety. When Ethan finally turned to her, the firelight flickered across both their faces. His, lined with years of solitude, hers, flushed with hope, reborn from ruin. "You're safe here," he said quietly, "for as long as you choose to be." Grace met his eyes, her voice trembling but sure. "Then I'll stay." Grace awoke to the crackle of firewood and the scent of venison stew. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was. The warmth, the soft fur blanket, the quiet hum of snow outside, it didn't feel real. Then her gaze found Ethan, crouched by the hearth, stirring a pot with deliberate care. He turned at the sound of her shifting. "Morning," he said, his deep voice calm, steady. "You slept half the day." Grace sat up, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, You needed it." He ladled soup into a tin bowl and handed it to her. "Eat. You'll feel human again." The broth was rich, heavy with herbs. Each spoonful sent warmth through her frozen bones. "You cook?" she asked, surprised. Ethan smirked faintly. "I prefer my food not raw." Grace smiled for the first time in weeks. It felt strange, like remembering how to breathe. That first week, she learned the rhythm of his life, quiet, ordered, self-reliant. Ethan rose with dawn, chopped wood, checked his traps, repaired tools. He said little, but every movement had purpose. Grace followed, watching, learning. When she offered to help, he didn't dismiss her. "Fine," he said one morning, handing her a broom. "Start with the cabin. You'll find dust older than you." It wasn't a joke exactly, but it made her laugh anyway. By midday, she had swept the floor, washed the dishes, and aired the bedding. She found an old trunk filled with folded linens and, tucked beneath them, a faded blue shawl, embroidered by careful hands. It smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. Ethan's voice startled her. "You found Anna's things." Grace turned, guilt rushing to her face. I didn't mean to pry." He shook his head. "You didn't." He took the shawl, held it for a moment, then folded it carefully again. She liked this time of year, said winter made the world honest. Grace wanted to ask what had happened, but the grief in his eyes stopped her. Instead, she said softly, "It's beautiful." He nodded once and left it at that. As days passed, the silence between them grew comfortable. They worked side by side, seldom speaking, yet the air was never empty. Grace tended the small vegetable garden behind the cabin and learned to cook with the wild roots Ethan brought home. He showed her how to patch torn clothes, sharpen a knife, and tell when the snow signaled a storm. At night, they would sit near the hearth, she mending clothes, he carving wood figures, bears, wolves, a mother deer with her fawn. One evening she asked, "Do you ever sell them?" He shrugged. "Sometimes. Mostly I make them so I don't forget how to build something gentle." Grace paused her stitching. "You talk like you built things that weren't." He looked into the fire, jaw tightening. "War teaches you to destroy faster than you build." Grace studied him quietly. "You fought?" Ethan didn't answer directly. "Everyone fights something. Some of us just had uniforms when we did it." The fire popped, and the moment settled into silence again, but softer now, as if something invisible had eased between them. The first snowstorm of February came suddenly, trapping them inside for 3 days. Grace baked biscuits from the last of the flour, and Ethan spent hours fixing the rifle he never seemed to use. When the wind howled hardest, he caught her shivering and handed her his fur-lined coat without a word. By the second night, the cabin glowed in the orange warmth of the fire. Grace sat on the rug, mending a torn sleeve. Ethan sat behind her, whittling a piece of cedar. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, not looking up. He stopped carving. "Because I could." "That's not an answer," he sighed. "Because once someone did the same for me, and I didn't deserve it either." Grace turned to face him. "Don't say that. You saved me. You—" "Don't make me into something I'm not, Grace." His voice was quiet, but firm. "I'm no hero. I just couldn't stand to see cruelty win again." Grace stared at him, her heart tightening. Then maybe that's what a hero is. Their eyes met, the air between them thick with unspoken things. Ethan looked away first, running a thumb along the wood grain. "You should rest," he said gruffly, but neither of them slept much that night. By spring thaw, Grace had changed. Her hands were stronger, her laugh freer. The mirror in the cabin, cracked but honest, no longer showed the girl who had knelt in the snow. She carried herself taller now, and though she still blushed when Ethan caught her looking, she didn't flinch from his gaze any more. One morning he handed her a small axe. "Time you learned to split wood." Grace blinked. "You trust me with that?" "Trust comes after the first swing," he said. She tried, and failed. The axe lodged crooked in the log. Ethan chuckled, stepping behind her. "Here," he murmured, guiding her hands with his. His chest brushed her shoulder, his breath warm against her ear. "Don't fight the weight. Let it fall for you." The next strike landed true, splitting the log clean in two. Grace gasped and laughed at once. "I did it!" Ethan smiled, a rare, unguarded smile that softened everything about him. "You did." For a heartbeat, neither moved. The scent of cedar hung in the air, sharp and sweet. Then Ethan stepped back, clearing his throat. "Good. Now finish the rest." Grace grinned. "Slave driver?" "Careful," he said. "I might make you chop for dinner, too." That night they ate stew by the fire again, laughter echoing off the cabin walls. But as the flames died low, quiet crept in. Grace watched him across the table, the firelight flickering over his face. "Ethan," she said softly, "do you ever think about what comes next?" He met her gaze. "Next? If I stayed." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and dangerous. Ethan's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, fear or hope or both. "You'd have to stop calling this my cabin," he said after a long pause. "It'd be ours." Grace's breath caught. "Then I'll stay." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded once. "Then we start over tomorrow." Outside, the snow whispered against the window. Inside, two souls, once broken, once buried, had begun to rebuild something neither thought they'd ever find again. Tomorrow, the world would test them. But tonight, in that small cabin in the wilderness, they were simply Ethan and Grace, two people who had finally found warmth after too long in the cold. The thaw came early that year. The river behind the cabin cracked open with a groan, sending thin sheets of ice drifting downstream. The pines dripped steady, a rhythm that marked time more gently than clocks ever could. Grace swept the porch, humming to herself. Her hair had grown longer, sunlight touched it with gold. She looked up when she heard Ethan's boots crunch the gravel path. He carried 2 rabbits and a small bundle of letters bound with twine. "Post rider came through the valley," he said, setting them on the table. "He dropped these at the mill." Grace frowned. "Letters? For you?" Ethan hesitated. "For you?" She blinked. "For me?" He handed her the bundle. Her name, Miss Grace Whitmore, was written in a hand she knew too well. The handwriting of the man she wished she could forget. Her father. The letter inside smelled faintly of tobacco and whiskey. His scent. The paper was creased and stained. "Grace, I've been thinking about you. You made me look like a fool in front of half the county. You owe me for that. You belong to me, girl, and if you think that mountain man makes you safe, think again. You'll come back, or I'll come take you back. T.W." Her hands trembled as she read. Ethan watched from across the room, eyes narrowing. "What does it say?" She folded it quickly, hiding the words. "Nothing important." He stepped closer. "Grace." She swallowed. "He knows where we are." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Let him come." But she saw the flicker of fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She sat near the window, watching moonlight touch the treetops. Ethan was outside, chopping wood long past midnight, as if he could cut the problem down to size. When he came in, sweat streaked his temples. He dropped the axe and leaned against the doorframe. "He won't reach you here?" Grace shook her head. "You don't know him. He doesn't stop." "I've met men like him," Ethan said quietly. "I used to be one." She turned, startled. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "You asked once why I came up here. I told you the mountain keeps its secrets. Maybe it's time I stop hiding behind that." He sat down across from her, elbows on his knees. 5 years ago, I killed a man." Grace froze. "It wasn't murder," Ethan said, "but it felt like it." He told her everything, about the wife he loved, Anna, and the child who never drew breath, about the night he tried to take Anna down the mountain in a blizzard, how she bled out before they reached the town, and how, when the doctors sneered that she'd been too weak to live anyway. Ethan lost control. One blow, one broken jaw. The man never got up again. He left the town before sunrise, carrying nothing but guilt. "I buried them both at the ridge," he said. "Since then, I've been living with ghosts, trying to remember what it means to protect without destroying." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Ethan," he shook his head, "don't look at me like that. I don't deserve pity." "It's not pity," her voice broke. "It's understanding." He looked away, jaw working. "You don't know what kind of man I am." "I know exactly what kind," she said softly. "The kind who saves strangers. The kind who still believes people like me deserve a second chance." Their eyes met, and the distance between them vanished. But peace never lasts long on the mountain. 3 days later, Ethan found tracks in the snow, horses, 6 or 7, fresh. He came back to the cabin tense and silent. Grace saw the storm gathering in his face. "They're close," he said. "Your father and his men." Grace went pale. "What do we do?" He loaded his rifle. "We prepare." "Ethan, please." He turned to her, voice hard. "I won't let him touch you again." "I don't want blood spilled because of me," she whispered. Ethan's eyes burned. "Grace, I already lost one woman I loved because I hesitated. I won't make that mistake twice." The word loved hung between them, heavy and electric. Grace stepped closer. "Then let me stand with you." He stared at her, torn between fear and pride. "You don't have to." "I do." Her voice trembled, but her gaze was steady. "You said I'm free. That means I choose what I fight for." Ethan lowered the rifle slowly. A small, fierce smile tugged at his lips. "Then you stay close. And if I fall, you won't?" He wanted to believe her. When dawn came, fog rolled low across the trees. The sound of hooves broke the quiet, distant, but growing nearer. Ethan stood at the cabin door, rifle across his chest. Grace stood beside him, clutching a lantern like a weapon. The first man appeared through the mist. Theodore Whitmore himself, flanked by 5 hired guns. His coat was lined with fur, his grin sharp as broken glass. "Morning, daughter," he called. "You've been hiding in fine company." Grace stepped forward, chin high despite the tremor in her knees. "I'm not hiding. I'm home." Her father laughed. "Home? With this animal? You think the world will let you forget what you are?" Ethan's voice cut through the air like thunder. "She's under my protection." Theodore's smile twisted. "Then you'll die for her." He raised his hand. The men fanned out, rifles gleaming. Ethan shifted his weight, steady and unshaken. "You can try." The first shot rang out, echoing off the cliffs. Snow exploded near the cabin door. Ethan returned fire precise and controlled, dropping one man instantly. The others scattered for cover. Grace ducked inside, reloading the rifle just as Ethan had taught her. When he called her name, she tossed it through the doorway, and he caught it mid-air. Another shot tore through the window, glass shattered. Grace fell to her knees, heart pounding. Then she saw it, the glint of metal near the tree line, a man taking aim. "Ethan!" she screamed. He turned just in time, firing first. The attacker dropped. Theodore snarled, "You can't save her, boy. You'll die like the rest." Ethan stepped forward into the open, snow swirling around him. "Maybe," he said, "but not before you learn what mercy looks like." He raised his rifle again. The gunfire echoed through the valley until the birds fell silent. When it ended, the snow lay red in patches. Grace stumbled from the cabin, shaking. Her father was gone, fled, or fallen she didn't know. Ethan stood amid the smoke, bleeding from his shoulder, breathing hard but alive. She ran to him, catching his arm as he swayed. "Ethan," he smiled faintly, "told you I'd keep you safe." She pressed her forehead to his chest, sobbing. "You can't keep doing this alone." "Then don't let me," he murmured. She lifted her face, meeting his eyes. "I won't." The last light of dusk fell across them, two silhouettes against the burning snow, broken people who had found something worth bleeding for. Night fell heavy and still. The storm clouds that had gathered during the gunfight broke at last, and snow began to fall again, quietly, relentlessly, as if trying to bury the violence beneath its softness. Inside the cabin, Ethan sat at the table, shirt stripped to the waist, blood seeping through the bandage Grace had wrapped around his shoulder. She worked silently, her hands trembling as she tightened the cloth. "You're losing too much blood," she whispered. "I've had worse," he muttered, though his jaw clenched with pain. Grace refused to smile. "That's not something to be proud of." Ethan looked up at her. The firelight caught the tear on her cheek before she could wipe it away. He reached for her wrist gently. "You were brave today." "So were you," she said. "But I don't ever want to see you step in front of a bullet for me again." He gave a low laugh, rough from exhaustion. "Then you'll have to teach me how to do otherwise." A sharp knock rattled the cabin door. Grace froze. Ethan grabbed his revolver with his good arm, motioning for her to stay back. He opened the door a fraction. Standing outside in the snow was Sheriff Miller of Black Ridge, his hat heavy with frost, his expression grim. Behind him, two deputies waited, rifles slung but not raised. "Evening, Blackthorn," the sheriff said slowly. "We heard there was trouble up here. Your name came up." Ethan stepped outside, closing the door behind him. "It's finished." "Not from where I stand," Miller said. "Your woman's father was found halfway down the trail, shot in the leg near Frozen. Says you murdered his men and stole his daughter." Ethan's eyes went cold. "He sold her." Miller nodded once. "That's what she says, too. But the law doesn't care much for who's right when bullets start flying." Ethan stayed silent. The snow fell between them, thick and soundless. "I know you, Blackthorn," Miller continued, softer now. "You've kept to yourself for years, never caused trouble. But if you come down the mountain with me now, maybe we can settle this peaceful." "And if I don't?" The sheriff sighed. "Then someone else will come, someone who doesn't care what's true." Ethan's grip tightened on the gun at his side. He looked back at the cabin, at the faint flicker of light through the window, at Grace's shadow moving inside. "She's all I have left," he said quietly. "I won't let them take her." Miller's gaze softened. "Then run. Tonight. I didn't see you. You understand me?" For a long moment, neither man moved. Then Ethan nodded once. "You never saw me." Miller tipped his hat, turned, and disappeared into the falling snow. Ethan went back inside. Grace stood by the fire, worry etched across her face. What did he say? That we have to go. She shook her head. "No, this is our home." "Not anymore," Ethan said. "If we stay, they'll keep coming. The only way to keep you safe is to start over somewhere no one knows us." Grace stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I don't care where we are, Ethan. Home is wherever you are." For the first time in years, he smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached his eyes. He cupped her face with his rough, calloused hand. Then we go together." Outside, the storm thickened. Ethan packed what little they had, blankets, tools, the wooden figures he'd carved. Grace gathered food, wrapped it in cloth, and placed it in the saddlebag. When everything was ready, Ethan took one last look around the cabin, the table they'd shared meals at, the fire that had seen them through long nights, the walls that had listened to their laughter. "Goodbye, old friend," he whispered. They mounted the horse just as dawn touched the horizon. The world below was endless white, stretching toward a new life neither could see but both were ready to face. Grace leaned into him, her arms tight around his waist. "Where will we go?" Ethan glanced toward the distant valley. "South, maybe beyond the border, somewhere with sun." "And peace?" she asked. He nodded. "And peace?" As they rode away, the snow began to cover the cabin behind them, erasing the footprints, erasing the blood, leaving only silence and the promise of beginning again. And for the first time since the world had broken both of them, they didn't look back. The valley opened wide beneath the morning sun, glistening after the storm. The snow had softened into mist that clung to the pines, and far below, a river shimmered like molten silver. Grace held tight to Ethan as they descended, her cheek pressed against his back, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat grounding her more than the horse's motion ever could. Hours passed before they stopped at a ridge overlooking the world below, a place untouched, infinite, and quiet. Ethan dismounted first and helped her down. She wobbled on her feet, smiling despite the exhaustion. "Where are we?" she asked. He looked out over the valley, "Far enough that no one will come looking." Grace followed his gaze. "Then this is freedom?" Ethan hesitated. "Freedom's not a place, it's the moment you stop running." She turned to him, wind tugging at her hair. "Are you done running?" His eyes met hers. "I think I am." For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the wind through the grass and the slow trickle of snowmelt down the ridge. Then Grace reached out, her fingers finding his. "You once told me I was safe with you. Does that still stand?" Ethan's voice dropped low. "You're safe here, Grace, always." Tears shimmered in her eyes, not from fear this time, but from a peace she had never known. She leaned into him, resting her head on his chest as he wrapped his arms around her. The warmth of his body, the vastness of the sky, the silence of the wilderness. It was all one thing now, one promise. As the sun began to set, painting the horizon in shades of gold and rose, Ethan built a small fire. Grace sat close, hands folded over her belly. The world felt wide open, yet completely theirs. "Do you think they'll ever stop talking about us?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled faintly. "They'll make up their own ending. They always do." "And what's ours?" He poked the fire, sending sparks upward. "Maybe it isn't meant to end. Maybe it just keeps going, as long as we keep choosing each other." Grace smiled through her tears. "Then I'll keep choosing you." He looked at her then, the lines on his face easing into something lighter, something full of hope. "And I'll keep choosing you until the mountain forgets our names." When night fell, stars filled the sky like scattered glass. The fire burned low, casting long shadows over their faces. Grace whispered, "Ethan?" He stirred. "Hmm? Promise me one thing. Anything. Don't ever go back to being alone." He tightened his arm around her, pulling her closer against his chest. "Not while you're breathing beside me." Above them, the mountains stood silent and ancient. keeping their secret. The story of a broken man and a discarded woman who found a new kind of love in the wilderness. And though the world might forget their names, the wind still carried a whisper through the pines. You're safe here. It's your home now, if you'll have it. Every time I tell a story like this, I think about the people listening, scattered across oceans, cities, and lonely rooms, who still believe in redemption. Grace and Ethan's story isn't just about love, it's about survival, about choosing to stay soft in a world that keeps trying to harden you. If you're listening right now, tell me, where are you hearing this from? Because somewhere out there, maybe far away, someone like you is still waiting to be seen, to be saved, or simply to be held. And if you still believe in love, don't go anywhere. The next story is yours.